So I formally welcome you to this session. Now, in this session, what we are going to cover is a reading by Jagdish Bhagwati and Arvind Panagriya. Now, to first to give you a background about this particular reading, this reading essentially talks about that in from 1990 in 1991 we had our major reforms, that is the year of watershed reforms, and in the economic architecture and the economic progress, that is again a watershed year because we had the policies of liberalization, privatization, globalization, which was under the umbrella of new liberalism, that the new approach that we followed. So the issue was that in 1991 when we had those reforms, those were kind of incomplete reforms because the reforms, if you see, were mostly related to product markets. So they were related to opening up of your trade, opening up of your domestic market, reducing the presence of the public sector, and increasing the foothold of the private sector. So everything revolved around increasing competition in the market. But that is one aspect of the market. You need to see what is the factor market. So there has to be factors of production which goes into the production of commodity, and then you have the final product. So what we had was reforms primarily focused towards the product market, and what was ignored since then was reforms of the factor market. Now, what are factor market? Factor market is nothing but the factors of production. So factors of production are land, labor, capital. So these were the reforms that were missing. Perhaps reforms like land reforms are still missing. Now, one of the issues, especially related to labor reforms, was that labor is not in the union list. Labor comes under state list. Comes under, sorry, in concurrent list. So when an item is under concurrent list, both the center and the states can make laws on that. Now, the problem is that center has made its own 44, 45 laws, and each particular state has its own laws. In all, we have somewhere around 200 laws to be followed by a particular manufacturer who goes into manufacturing with a certain amount of labor. So the kind of due diligence or the kind of paperwork that is generated is huge. So that creates a lot of inefficiency, and a lot of these labor laws are such that they will only apply to you if you are a big enough firm. Now, what is that big enough firm? If you have more than 10 workers, if you have more than 20 workers. So there is a threshold. After that particular threshold, these labor laws will apply. So what the Indian manufacturers have done is that they have primarily been small. So they've become only micro enterprises with lesser amount of efficiency. So their efficiency is small, and the kind of micro enterprises is huge. In fact, one of the recent surveys that was done, in India, 99% of the MSMEs are micro MSMEs. So these micro MSMEs are not expanding or not growing because they fear that if they grow out, then one, they will lose out the tax incentives, and second, they will also be faced with the wrath of the labor market and the labor inspectors. So that kind of is one view towards labor market reforms, and which these two authors argue that it is the labor market reform which has constrained the Indian manufacturing sector, and which has also constrained the structural transformation of the economy. So we've also talked about in our classes that how an economy changes its structure from being agrarian to an industrial to a service led. So in our case, we've directly moved from an agrarian economy to a service led economy. Apart from that, if you see manufacturing has not happened. The share of manufacturing is stagnant, and not only that, the kind of urbanization that we've had is very limited. Okay, so the kind of urbanization that we've had is limited. So this reading in the initial part talks about all of these reforms, all of these laws, and it also talks about the number of different labor laws which are kind of a inhibiting factor, which do not allow Indian manufacturers to work freely. So we'll talk about 6-7 labor laws, and in the last part of this reading, there is a counter. There's an argument, and there is a counter argument to it. So there are a lot of skepticals about labor laws. So a lot of people, especially from the left orientation, people from left, center left, and left. So all of these economists from these ideologies, they kind of defend the labor laws. They say that labor laws are very essential. They point out that it is not the labor laws which are problematic. These are other issues. So there are arguments. There are 7 arguments given by these kinds of skeptics, and Jagdish Bhagwati and Arvind Panagria kind of counter those arguments. The 7 arguments, and there are 7 counter arguments. So we'll cover those arguments as well. And then we'll switch on in this session. We'll switch on to another reading by Achin Chakrabarty, who again kind of defends the labor laws which are here, and he says that it is not actually the labor laws. The counter arguments that were given here. So it kind of defends that we don't need freer labor laws. We need more education. We need more structural transformation. So he gives other arguments apart from the labor laws, which he calls as the futility theory. We'll cover that as well. But just before starting this class, I just wanted to share certain basics of the labor market which you need to know. Now, what are these basics? These basics, this is available in the second reading. If you see my PDF, scroll down after the EPW article, I've put on this particular slide. Now, this is a slide from this year's economic survey which talks about the labor market. Now, what is this talking about? This is the quantum of the formal, informal, organized, unorganized sector in the Indian economy. Now, the way that I've put it is a little different to what is being presented here. Now, the way to read it is that we have organized. So we have organized sector, we have unorganized sector, then you have total. You need to note. You just need to make this particular table for 17. Now there are 2 different data sources. This data source is from a different time, and this data source is from a different survey. This data source is basically from the PLFS, Periodic Labor Force Survey 2017, and this is from the NSSO data, NSSO 2011. This is the latest data available, and I'll be quoting quite a few items from this particular data. In fact, I had given you certain statistics about unemployment, so you can always incorporate those in your answers. Now, let's understand what is organized, what is unorganized, what is formal, and what is informal. Now, see, the definitions are given here. Organized and unorganized classification is given by National Commission for Enterprise and Unorganized Sector. So this commission gives you the classification. What it says is that if there is any enterprise, private enterprise, in which there is sale or production of goods and services, and there are less than 10 workers. If there are less than 10 workers working, less than 10 workers working, then it comes under the unorganized sector. If you have more than 10 workers, then that comes under the organized sector. And this 10 will become 20 if you are not using power. So these days everything uses power, everything uses electricity. So therefore you can pretty much take it as 10. That any organization with less than 10 workers will be under unorganized sector, and any sector which is more than 10 workers will be under organized sector. For example, let's take a Gargi College. Gargi College has more than 10 employees, so it comes under the organized sector. But again, when we will come to formal and informal, we will have certain broader classification. Now, what are formal and informal? Informal are majorly in the unorganized sector. So if you see your informal sector majorly is under the unorganized sector. However, they can also be under the formal sector. So the table that I want you to make is a table whereby you will have the unorganized sector, organized sector, informal, formal, total, and total. So this is the kind of table that I want you to make. This will be, if you see this particular data set, this will be your overall informal will be 90, your overall formal will be 10. Now what do we mean by this 90 and 10? from our workforce. Now, what is your workforce? The number of people that are working in your country. So that is called your workforce. And please differentiate between workforce and labor force. Labor force is everyone in the age group of 15 to 59 who is either working or is willing to work. So that is called your labor force. And the people in this age group who are actually working is called your workforce. The difference between the two will be your unemployment. And if you divide it by your labor force, that will be your unemployment rate. Such a simple definition. There's nothing technical about it. This is called your workforce, people in this age group who are working. So in India, you have somewhere around 480 million people who are working. First, see this figure gives you 47.13. Now what is this? See, you will find this in crores. If you convert this, this will be 480 million people. So there are approximately 40% of 40% of your population is working. Approximately 40% of your population is working. Now, so of these 480 million, if you see 90%, see this, 42.5 crore people. That means 420, almost 425 million people are working in the informal sector, whereas only 5 million people are working in the formal sector. That means this is the figure that I want you to write in your formal. Informal, you can write this as 90, this 10. This of course will be 100, and you can write this as 81 and 19. And all you need to remember, if you want to remember this statistics, all you need to remember is 3 statistics. Remember this particular statistic, remember this particular statistic. This obviously will be 100, and within this, remember any one particular statistic, and your table will be complete. Right? So in a 3 by 3 table, you need to understand only 3 critical. So now the informal sector is what? Informal sector is basically which do not have, people who do not have any employment or security benefits. So take the example of daily wage workers, or take the example of a farmer. A farmer has no social security, has no employment benefits. If a female farmer is working, she does not have any maternity right. If a farmer is working, he does not have any health insurance unless something is provided by the government. That is a different health insurance altogether. But with respect to work, he doesn't have any health insurance. This can also prevail in the organized sector. So your question might be that how in an organized sector you can have informality. Suppose take the example of someone like a guard in Gargi College. So usually these class D services, guard or take the security services in general in your MNCs, these are outsourced services. So these are kind of contractual services. These people do not have the regular employment benefits which the normal employees have. Leave alone the guards. Take the case of ad hoc employees, ad hoc professors. They have partial kind of social security, not full social security. For example, female teachers in Delhi University do not have the right to maternity leave. So again, this shows that that contractualization, what is happening in the organized sector. So the organized sector can also have informal workers. So although ad hoc professors cannot be informal, but at the same point of time, not complete security is there. Some amount of quasi functionality is there. So the better example would be the contractual services like security, like gardening, like daily wage workers. That is a better example. Then in case of formal, of course, in case of formal sector, you have all the social security. For example, any government employee has all securities. He has an health insurance. That person has an LTC, maternity benefits, paternity benefits. So you have a lot of benefits which are given. Social security, you have the pension, NPS scheme. So you have a lot of social as well as employment benefits which are not available with the informal sector. And if you see this table, informal organized has 10%. So all you need to do is informal organized has 10, and informal and unorganized has 80. So all you need to do is, so this is the kind of, you can inverse it, you can make it according to you, whatever suits you, but this is the table that you need to remember, especially if you are preparing for any competitive exam, I mean for IAS or IES. This is this is kind of a mandatory question to prepare, and this is a mandatory kind of a table that you need to remember. Whenever you're quoting a data, you need to write down that where are you quoting it from. A lot of students, what they do is they quote data, they do not write where has this data come from. You need to write periodic labor force survey 2017, and you can write picked up from the economic survey part 1 2019-20. This is where this data is from. Having discussed the formality and informality, let's switch to our. So I hope this part is clear. This particular reading talks about is, so it talks about that the factor market reforms are missing in India. Whenever you have the talk about labor reforms, you actually have to have a balancing act. So in the end, we will also discuss the labor market reforms which have been initiated by 3 states. For example, if you have heard in the last couple of months, because of COVID-19, 3 states, UP, MP, and Gujarat, they have kind of eliminated a lot of, through an ordinance, they have removed a lot of labor laws. These ordinances are yet to be passed by the President of India. In fact, the central government has asked, because it's again a concurrent subject. So in case of a concurrent subject, whatever law that the state government passes automatically does not take effect until unless the president gives assent to this to those laws. So these what the NDA government, the central government has done is they have, and on all these 3 states, you have the BJP government at the state level. So they have asked to reconsider a couple of laws. Now, when we talk about labor laws, you cannot actually have one way or the other. So you cannot have laws which are completely in favor of the employers. So because if you have complete elimination of labor rights, that will lead to exploitation, and ultimately it will lead to a lot of disputes, a lot of labor problems. So if you've heard, around 7, 8, or 10 years ago, there was a huge strike in Manesar, especially at the Maruti factory. In fact, one of the managers were killed in that particular strike. So those kinds of those, you need to guard the rights of the labor as well, give them adequate protection, as well as the same point, as the same level, you need to provide a seamless opportunity to the manufacturer, so that they can easily hire labor, as well as they can change their work profile. It does not become very cumbersome to hire labor, and to change their job profile. Or if a person is not working, then probably fire that particular person. We'll have an interesting case in this reading, which whereby that person, I mean, there's huge legal battles. So we'll talk about that as well. So it's all about labor laws is all about balancing, a balancing act between that of manufacturers, increasing the manufacturing, increasing exports, increasing productivity, increasing employment in the country. All of these are on one hand, and on the other hand, you have the rights of the laborers. So you have to have a balancing act. So the entire debate is that, are Indian labor laws too restrictive? This is what we are going to talk about now. So as I was telling you in the initial part of this session, that India has not been able to structurally transform itself. Now, what do we mean by structural transformation? By structural transformation, we mean 3 things. That A, have we been able to move from an agrarian sector to an industrial based sector? And we find that we have not been able to do that. In fact, what we have done is that we have moved from agriculture directly to service sector. Service sector right now commands somewhere around 57 to 58% of your GDP, whereas the agrarian sector only contributes somewhere around 17%. And if you see the share of manufacturing is stagnant at 16% for the last 30 years. The share of industrial sector is somewhere around 25-26%. The remaining of add these two whatever is the remaining part is the share of industrial. Within the industrial sector, the manufacturing share is 16%, and this 16% is constant for the last 30 odd years, which shows that we have not been able to transform ourselves. Then the second aspect of transformation is that have we been able to move the labor from informal sector to formal sector? And again, we find that we've not been able to do that. If you see, we've not been in our informal sector. You have 10% people in the formal sector and 90% people in the informal sector. And if you compare it to 2004 2005, this ratio was 7 and 93. In fact, what we have done is, although we have added more people to the formal sector, we have added them in the organized informal sector. So what has happened in the last few years is, people do not want to follow the labor laws, and because they don't want to follow the labor laws, an easy escape is to contractualize that. That means something like a contractor. A contractor is not you're not hiring the labor directly. You are hiring a contractor, and that contractor takes care of the labor. It's something like last year I had done a lot of construction work at my home. So I did not hire a carpenter, I did not hire an electrician, I did not hire a plumber, so or a mason. All of these 4 particular jobs are essential to reconstruct a house. Instead, what I did was I hired a contractor, and this particular contractor was having an informal kind of a relationship with all these people, and he was responsible for all these people. And that essentially is also happening in the Indian economy, that rather than hiring directly, people are hiring contractors, and those contractors are now responsible for the labor. That is called as contractualization of the labor market. Now, so again, informal and formal sector, we have not been able to transform people from the informal sector to the formal sector. And the third aspect which is argued is that of urbanization. And if we see the amount of urbanization, only 31% of our country is urbanized, whereby we have the definition of urbanization in this 31% is very broad. It's a very broad definition of what is called as urban, and which essentially means that 69% is still is in the rural areas. And if we see from the last 70 odd years since independence, this pace is extremely small. We are only increasing 2% per 2% increase in the urbanization. So this again shows that when it comes to structural transformation, we have failed badly. However, what has happened is this structural transformation has happened in the GDP, but not in the employment or in the structure of the economy. These are the 3 statistics that I've already quoted, that 47% is still, if you see the employment, 47% of the people are still employed in the agrarian sector. I've already told you that 90% workforce is employed in the informal sector and 31% urbanization. So on these 3 parameters, our economy has not been able to transform itself. I was telling you about 2% change in urbanization per decade. Then these are the definitions. I've already given you the definition of what is organized and what is unorganized sector. Moving on to that, the factors why Indian entrepreneurs have taken a flight from the labor. Why are they not hiring a lot of labor? So if you've gone through a course on international economics, international trade. Now there you would have understood that India, the normal trade theories or any particular trade theory, say Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, it says that a country should specialize in those commodities in which it has comparative advantage. And how do you have comparative advantage? You need to see that what is the resource base. So Heckscher-Ohlin theorem would say that a country should specialize in commodity whose production requires intensive use of its abundant factor. Now, what do we mean by that? That as a country or a country like India, which is labor abundant, how do we know that? How do we know that it's a labor abundant country? Labor abundance is known by the W/R ratio. If you see the wages to the rate of interest, in our country, wages are extremely low because we have excess amount of labor available with us. So thereby the W/R ratio is pretty much low. So we are a labor abundant because we are a labor abundant country. And because we are a labor abundant country, we should specialize in commodities which are labor intensive. What are labor intensive commodities? Commodities in which the K by L ratio is small or the L by K ratio is high. So essentially what we are talking about is, given our comparative advantage of labor, India as a country should specialize in labor intensive commodities and should go for labor intensive manufacturing. Manufacturing of textiles, manufacturing of apparels, manufacturing of the general manufacturing using your labor. But over the years, we will see in this that over the years, because of certain kind of labor laws, the manufacturers are not willing to hire labor. Instead of hiring 10 new labor, they are willing to invest in a machine. So we are going exactly opposite to what the comparative advantage theory or the Excher-Ohlin theorem would suggest us to do. And this is where there is the difference between India and China. China has been able to capture those markets. Leave China, even countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh have been able to specialize in their comparative advantage. These new low developed countries are now becoming hubs of manufacturing because of their cheap labor. Whereas if you see, India has a cheaper labor advantage, even if you compare it to Bangladesh. UP has a lesser wage rate, but still because of other factors, many other factors, whereby labor being one of them, that people are not ready to invest in, or the MSMEs, especially the medium enterprise, are not willing to invest in the enterprises or manufacturing in India. And that is what we are going to talk about. So the reasons are the slow growth of manufacturing. I already told you that in India, the growth of manufacturing is extremely small. We have not been able to transform people from the agrarian sector to the industrial sector, and that is the reason why in 1981-82 the share of manufacturing was 17%, and you can write down here that in 1920 the share of manufacturing is again 17%. So see, in last 35-40 years, even in last 40 years, nothing has happened in the manufacturing sector. The share is exactly constant. So thereby it shows that there's something putrid in our economy that is happening in the labor sector. Then this table I've already given to you. Now the poor performance of labor intensive manufacturing. Now, even if the share of manufacturing is stagnant in the economy, even if it's stagnant at 17 or 16%, some amount of employment could have generated if output would have shifted from the organized sector manufacturing in favor of unskilled labor intensive activities. So what we are saying is that even with the same amount of manufacturing share, another way in which the economy could have progressed was that if labor intensive manufacturing share could have increased. However, if we see that in 1990 the share of labor intensive manufacturing was 13%, and even in 2004 this was 13%. So in manufacturing, labor intensive, so I'm basically dividing manufacturing into two parts. Manufacturing again into two parts: labor intensive manufacturing and non labor intensive manufacturing. What is labor intensive manufacturing? Where the K by L ratio is small. These are all labor intensive manufacturing, especially of apparels, something like apparels, handicrafts, leather products, all of these products. And if you see that the share of these kind of manufacturing firms in the economy has not improved. In fact, the data is given by till 2013. If you see post 2004, there has been more emphasis on capital goods rather than labor intensive goods, and which is also visible in our exports. How is that visible in our exports? If you follow the Excher-Ohlin theorem, this should be visible in our exports, because if we are a labor abundant country, we should be exporting labor intensive commodities. But if you see the share of our exports, we will see that the share of capital intensive or semi skilled labor intensive commodities has increased from 41% to 65% between 1991 and 2000. So This is kind of what you would have understood in an international economics as Leontief paradox, that instead of us exporting labor intensive goods, we are actually exporting capital intensive goods. We have become exporters of something like cars. Now automobile industry, we are a huge hub in South Asia. We are also exporting commodities like softwares. So if we see, or let's talk about only about manufacturing. In 1991, if you see, the share of ready-made garments, textiles is somewhere around 12%. Can you see this share? And if you see the share in, oh sorry, this is the 1991. This is the 1991. Can you see the share of textiles, ready-made garments, and gems and jewelry? These are traditionally low skill items. So the share was somewhere around 24 and 40% is the share of these items. And if you see the share, it has actually declined. The share of gems and jewelry is the same because again, India has become major hub of, especially Surat has become major hub of gems and jewelry. But if you see the ready-made garments and the textiles, other textiles, this is actually halved. So this shows that what has happened is that India has started exporting capital intensive commodities rather than labor intensive commodities, going against the theory of the natural advantage theory that is prevalent in international trade. In fact, this has been at the cost of we losing out industries to countries like Vietnam, where the entire shoe market has gone, and in terms of apparel, a lot of this market has now gone to Bangladesh. So our low skill manufacturing is actually in shambles. And the third aspect is the rising capital intensity in production. Even in the current industries, the current level of industries, people are not willing to hire more labor. So what people are doing is, people, instead of hiring unskilled workers or hiring labor intensive technologies, people within the production sector are buying more machines rather than hiring more labor. So within each industry we are finding that the K by L ratio is increasing, that not only are we not hiring labor, not only is the share of labor intensive industries increasing, the actually in each particular industry the capitalization is increasing. So labor saving technologies are being used. Rather than hiring 10 labor, we are hiring 2 machines, so that we don't need to face the labor issues. So the labor intensity is going down in the Indian economy. Again, this all shows that there is a major problem in the Indian labor market. So the three issues that we have covered in this is that there is poor manufacturing, we have poor labor intensive industrialization in our country, which is also visible in our export composition, and within each industry the labor intensity in each industry is actually falling, the capital intensity is rising. So these are the three aspects that we covered. Now what has happened because of these three things is, because of these three factors, what has happened, what is, and apart from that, the what these three issues show us is that the firm distribution is such that in India there is something called a missing middle. This is a reading that we have covered in the previous semester as well. What has happened is that in Indian labor market there is an overwhelming share of micro enterprises which have less than 10 workers. They have a huge share. In fact, in the unincorporated MSMEs, which have not been incorporated, with there is no legal, which have not been recognized by the MCA. So the unincorporated MSMEs, there are 63 million of them, and of them 99% of your enterprises are small, are micro, not even small. So this MSME stands for micro, small, medium enterprises. So 99% of your enterprises are actually your small enterprises, and these small enterprises do not have very high efficiency because they're essentially small sweatshops. And again, because of this, you have an overwhelming share of small firms, And what you see is visible in this diagram as well. So in India, if you see less than 8 workers, you see that 85-90% of firms are here. And in this particular range, you do not have any firm. Then you have certain amount of visible firms in this particular range, but between that 10 to 200, especially 10 to 200, 10 to 200 types of firms, these are absolutely missing in India. And this is what is called as missing middle, because one of the major reasons of this missing middle is that these small scale manufacturers, these sweatshops that you have, are not willing to hire more than 8, more than 10 people. And this is the reason is, again, remember the definition of the organized and the unorganized sector. The moment that you have more than 10 people, there is a barrage of labor laws which will be applicable to you. So therefore these firms are not willing to grow big, because growing big means facing the wrath of those labor inspectors. Coming to this again, as I told you that this is the comparison. If you see the employment, less than 49 workers, 84% of the workers employed in the Indian manufacturing in 2005 was in those firms which have less than 49 workers, and only 11% of those firms are there which have more than 200 workers. If you compare these figures to China, these figures are 25 and 52. This was about the missing middle. Again, coming back to this particular missing middle is also reflected in our export performance. The inability of the Indian firms to manufacture anything, the reason that we are dependent so much on China. So if you hear the news these days, there is a huge clamor that we should not import from China, we should ban Chinese product. How much of products can you ban? Do you know that 99% of your pharmaceutical products, there's something called active pharmaceutical ingredients, API, which goes into production of almost every pharmaceutical product, be it your antibiotics, be it your painkillers, everything requires API, and 99% is basically being imported from China. If you talk about electronic products, majority of these products are again made in China, because Chinese have these small scale firms which are actually producing all of them. If you talk about ventilators, if you talk about any of these medical equipments, all of that is made in China. Electronics, electricals, pharmaceutical, all apparels, all of this is now made in China, because of the fact that they have made advantage from their MSME firms. They have their small and medium scale enterprise, which are called as town and village enterprises. They have now grown into huge firms now. So they have a systematic order whereby small firms become medium firms, and now they become global firms. So your firms like Alibaba, which started at small firms and now become behemoths, global behemoths. Yesterday there was a news of Tencent MD becoming the richest Chinese. So these were all small firms, and now they become huge firms. So there you have a progressive system of growth. In India, you have a regressive system whereby uh, the moment that you grow big, the net of the government is becoming huge, and because of that, people are not ready to invest in India. Or manufacturer are not ready to invest in manufacturing in India, and which is being reflected in our export performance as well. Now, we will talk about the labor laws last year onwards, because the government has a majority both in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. The labor laws are on annual, especially on the central level. So these 44 central laws are now being converted into 4 labor codes. One labor code is on wages, one labor code is on industrial relation, one labor code is on social security, and one labor code is on occupational safety, health, and working condition. So all these complex 44 labor laws are now being coded into 4 labor codes, so that the compliance to these laws are much easier. The problem that we've had is that we have completely neglected, from 1991 onwards, we have completely neglected the labor market as well as the land market, and we've only focused on what are called as the product market reforms. The reforms that we've had: investment licensing reform, the protection reform, the opening up of the economy, the globalization reform, this removing of the small scale reservation, all of them are majorly related to your product market, and nothing has been done to ameliorate the concerns of the manufacturers at the factor market level. So, and that is why we do not have these large firms. Now, the explanation to that is that one of the explanation is that the labor market, the cost of hiring labor, and because of the inflexibility in the labor market, the cost of hiring labor in the formal sector is extremely expensive. This is one argument to this. The second argument to this is that we do not have bankruptcy laws, which we recently introduced in 2016 called as IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Unfortunately, this has been suspended because of COVID-19, and this will be applicable from next year onwards. Now, so in again on the bankruptcy laws, if someone has taken your money, I mean, you would have to go from pillar to post from different courts, and the judicial process will be extremely lengthy. And because of this extreme lengthiness of the judicial process and the bankruptcy laws, a lot of manufacturers or a lot of companies were not willing to invest in manufacturing, and people are not even willing to lend them. With IBC, what people, what manufacturers and what companies know is that if you're not willing to, if if your business is not working, and if you're declared bankrupt, then in that case you have in all 270 days to resolve your issues. And if it doesn't happen, then your the assets of your company will be sold off, and a new company or someone else will take over that particular company, and your creditors will be paid from these sell-off that will happen from your particular organization. So now IBC is there. Then you have a distorted land market. Again, land market is a problem because land comes under the state list. So allocating land is a huge issue when it comes to manufacturing. So you need to acquire land, that entire land acquisition process. The government, although tried in 2015 to have a land acquisition bill, but that land acquisition bill was not passed by the Rajya Sabha. So the government did not have the majority in Rajya Sabha. So now it's up to individual states to renegotiate their own land market laws. And then you have poor infrastructure in India. Majority of trade takes place through railways and through ships. So waterways. So 90% of world trade actually takes place through shipping. And if you see the kind of condition of our ports and the kind of delays that happen in our economy in terms of shipping, that basically makes India as an unattractive resource for investment for any particular company in terms of manufacturing. Let's talk about the labor laws. As I told you that in India you have 44 central laws, and then you have state laws. So something like state of West Bengal has around 150 labor laws. So in all a particular manufacturer, if suppose I am a manufacturer and I'm going into manufacturing, and I say these days this is a good time to invest in say medical devices. So I want to make ventilators, or I want to make certain kind of medical device. Now to make that medical device, I would need some certain amount of labor. Now in a state like West Bengal, I would have to comply with these 200 labor laws. That means filing of these 200 labor laws compliance, you need to file different compliances for these 200 labor laws. See the amount of effort that has moved from me focusing towards manufacturing to just focusing towards the paperwork that is being generated. So there is an argument that which will see that although there's huge number of labor laws, no one follows because it is very easy to bribe the inspectors, the labor inspectors, and it's in India it's very easy to break law. Therefore this should not be an inhibiting factor. That's not the point. The point is for a manufacturer, the tension and the kind of due diligence pressure that is being generated on him, that I would have to follow 200 laws, and I would have to probably face the wrath and the corruption associated of the labor of the tax inspectors. So that is one of the inhibitors because of which the manufacturers will not go for manufacturing. So there is a cheeky comment that in India you cannot implement 100% of labor laws without violating 20% of them. So actually some of the labor laws kind of contradict to each other, and the problem is of the complexity of these labor laws and the burdens of the compliance of them. Then let's now discuss certain labor laws which are important. Among these labor laws, one of the labor laws which we'll talk in detail is the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, but these are other labor laws that you need to know. So one of the laws is Trade Union Act. What this Trade Union Act says that in order to make a trade union, a firm need to require 7 or more workers. Now, what happens when you have a trade union? For example, what is a trade union? Something like, if you must have heard of DUTA, Delhi Universities Teachers Association. Now, what is this? This is a trade union. This is a union of Delhi University teachers, and the members of the elected members of this say the executive head is a professor in Kirunimmal College by the name of Rajiv Ray. Now, he is the representative of our concerns, and he kind of takes our concerns and portrays it either in the courts or with the government. So these trade unions, what they do is whatever issues that the labor have, they can be argued in either in the courts, or representations can be made in different forums, either in labor courts or in other aspects. So even these trade unions have the empower. This act also empowers the trade unions to strike. So last year, if you've heard that we had a strike for somewhere around a month or so, so that strike was organized by DUTA. So now what happens is that because if you have 7 or more workers, then you can form the workers can form a trade union. Therefore, this gives an incentive to the manufacturers or a manufacturer to hire less than 7 workers. So if you have less than 7 workers, then you do not have a trade union. If you do not have a trade union, these possibilities of labor courts and disputes and this entire trade union act does not apply to you. Then this is one reason why you will have a smaller workforce with you. Then you have Employees State Insurance Act, which again is valid for if you have more than 10 workers. If you have more than 10 workers, and if a person is hired up to 10,000 rupees a month, then you would have to, if this applies to you, if you have more than 10 workers, then you would have to provide benefits for sickness, you would have to provide maternity, disability, old age benefits. So all of these benefits would have to be given under the Employee State Insurance Act if you have more than 10 workers. This again gives an incentive to the employers not to hire more than 10 workers. Then you have a Factories Act. Now, Factories Act is again valid if you have more than 10 workers. And what this does is it gives working regulation. It provides working regulation laws. So what are these regulations? That a person will be given at least one holiday for 10 days of work. You will have one holiday. Then employment of women will not be there between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the night. Then you would have to provide drinking water to uninterrupted drinking water to facility to the workers. You should provide your safety equipment to the workers. The amount of weight that a particular person can carry on his shoulders is limited. Then you should have canteen or these daycare facilities. So all of these things are there, which essentially shows that because the number of specific items that you need to follow, the kind of paperwork, the kind of due diligence that will be created because of Factories Act is huge, and you would have to these again, like income tax returns, these are labor law returns, and you would have to file them half yearly and then annually as well. Then you have an EPF Act as well, in which the employers need to contribute to the PF contribution, which is the retirement for their social security. So after their work is over, after they retire from your particular factory, you need to pay them for their social security in the old age. So if you have more than 20 workers, then you would have to have this EPF law also applies to you. Then you have other acts like maternity benefits, and you have minimum wage acts, which are central acts. These are other central acts which are applicable. These are apart from the state laws as well. So a particular, suppose the center has given the minimum wage as 150 rupees per day, then the state might have a, suppose a state, say like West Bengal says that no, this is the wage rate given by the center. In my state, the wage rate is 180. So each particular state can have a different wage rate which is higher than the center's wage rate. So not only you have to comply to the center's laws, you also need to see what are the state laws applicable to me. So again, there is an issue that even if there are poorly enforced, that people do not check that you are following the laws or not, still the kind of paperwork that is required is huge. The act that I want you to make a star about is the IDA, the Industrial Disputes Act. This is the crown prince of all the labor laws that are available, because this basically talks about that if there is any dispute between the employer or the employee, or between the employees, you will have to go to the labor court. The problem is that this IDA Act, the Industrial Dispute Act, is actually against the employees, and it's stacked towards the towards the employees, and it is stacked against the employers. So a lot of the disputes that go into IDA are actually ruled in favor of employees rather than employers, and that is why, to avoid IDA, Industrial Dispute Act, what people are doing is, instead of hiring regular workers, they are hiring contractual workers. Remember the contract worker example that I told you? So that is what they are doing. Why? Because if there is any dispute, the power to adjudicate that particular dispute is with the labor department of that particular state. So the labor department in that particular state where the firm is located will handle that. And the first step is first reconciliation, then you go to labor court, and then you go to tribunal. So it's a very lengthy process of at times 10 to 15 years. In fact, one of the examples that is given in this particular reading is that a labor dispute going around to 30 years, and after 30 years that dispute was eventually favored by Supreme Court, that dispute was eventually in the favor of the employee. So I'll briefly talk about that example, that a particular employee was caught sleeping on the factory workshop, and thereby he was fired, and this entire procedure went to the reconciliation, to labor courts, to tribunals, and to High Court, and then to Supreme Court. And after that 30-year long process, eventually the Supreme Court said no, that this particular should have been reinstated, should not have been fired, and the firm would have to pay for those 30 years of wages as well. So that is the kind of law that this is, which has an anti-employer bias. And again, one of the features of this law is that if you have more than 100 workers in your particular factory, then even if you want to stop production and you want to shut down your factory, you cannot do that. This particular chapter 5B of this particular act does not allow you to wind up your business, because if you're winding up your business, then you would have to lay off, retrench the workers, and that is not allowed. So even if you're unprofitable, you are forced to continue because of this particular act. And for each particular individual, you need to take a permission to fire. And then you have the contract labor laws, whereby instead of hiring your normal labor, what you can do is hire an indirect employee who gives you a kind of protection from the labor laws. And that is what the Indian manufacturers have smartly now started doing. They started hiring more of contractual labor rather than regular labor. Coming to the final part of this reading. What is this part talking about? This part talks about the skeptics. What the skeptics say, that what is the adverse impact of labor laws. So basically the skeptics are saying, the argument that you're making, that it is because of the labor law that you do not have manufacturing. It is because of the labor law that is constraining the Indian economy and the Indian manufacturing. Those arguments are all wrong. So there are arguments given by the skeptics, and what the two authors have done, they have given counter arguments by the authors against the arguments given by the skeptics. So this is how this will proceed. One of the problems is that one of the arguments is that in the Indian manufacturing, 80% of the cost is actually labor. So, and this cost is actually a step function. So mathematically, what happens is that this is not a clean curve. What happens is that if you are hiring less than 7 workers, then your cost is this. If you are hiring 10 workers, then your cost becomes this. If you are hiring more than 10 workers, then your cost becomes this. Can you see that the cost actually in cost of hiring labor, I mean, is a step function, and this cost keeps increasing at different step. If you are hiring more than 100 workers, then what happens? You have the application of IDA, then the cost increases even more. So because of the kind of labor laws that you have, the cost of labor is having a stepwise function only, and this kind of materializes the optimization of hiring more labor only happens if you have more than 400-500 labor. So only at a very large level, at a very large scale, the economies of scale works in such a way that hiring labor is justified. That is the reason of missing middle. That between 10 to 200 or 250, there is the economic incentive, the economics of labor is not in favor of hiring more labor. So that is the argument of this. And moving to these alternative arguments. So let's first talk about the argument given by the skeptics, and we will then have the counter argument. Now, what is the first argument? The first argument is that it is not because of the labor laws which is a problem. The problem is that we do not have the skill required to do the manufacturing work. Now, of course, we have a huge shortage of skilled workers, but at the same point of time, what we are talking about is a very low skill manufacturing. Now, in a low skill manufacturing, say talking about stitching a mask. So take the example, India before COVID did not have sufficient amount of either these N95 or these masks. But what has happened? Now if you find, you will have a you go to any market, you will find 10 kinds of different Indian made masks. What just happened? We know that we have, it's not rocket science to make a particular mask. You teach a particular person how to make a mask. Even an illiterate person with a knowledge of sewing and stitching can make a particular mask, can make that mask. So it is not actually, this low skill manufacturing is a kind of a repetitive job, and you learn a lot during while working. So this argument is actually a false argument. So because of the kind of multiplicity, the kind of repeated performance of the same task, you can always learn that. So this learning curve in this particular low skill manufacturing is not steep, and because of that, this could not be a inhibiting factor. And even if you see the gross enrollment ratio, the number of people who are who are educated by according to the national standards, class the class 8th, the class 8th and class 10th, so all of that is increasing. So the general the enrollment, the gross enrollment ratio is increasing. That means that Indians are getting educated, Indians are going to school, more people are going to school. That shows that this argument is actually false. People have the requisite skills to be employed in low skill manufacturing. There is something else which can perhaps be explained by the labor laws. Then the second argument. Now, the way that I have put is the counter argument is basically the argument by the skeptics, right? And the arguments is those which are given by the authors. So you can understand either way. So the argument given by the skeptics against labor laws, that's why it's called the counter argument. So instead, what you can do is you can write this as the counter argument by the skeptic, and you can write this as the argument by the author. So you can reverse that thing, the way that it's given in this reading. So the second counter argument by the author, by the skeptics, is that in China, what has happened is the large scale factories have a lot of female labor force. So what do we mean by that? Now, the labor force participation rate in India for females, the labor force participation rate is somewhere around 20 to 25%. That means out of 100 women in the age group of 15 to 59 who are eligible to work, who are basically allowed, who can work, only 20 to 25 women are willing to work. Whether they get a job or not is a different factor. This is the people who are actually entering the labor market to work, which is very low in India. Whereas in case of China, this is pretty high. And this is according to the social attitudes, the patriarchal family that we have. So it is because of these factors that we do not have that manufacturing and we do not have sufficient people. Now, again, the authors say that this premise is actually false because why not I mean, if that is true, why not we can we have more men into manufacturing? Why is that? I mean, men are not bounded by this law, especially a law like Factories Act. Remember, Factories Act says that between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. you cannot hire female workers. So why can't you have shifts? You can have a shift in the morning for females. You can have a shift for men in the evening. So you can have shifts. So, and why not employ more men into manufacturing? So again, this kind of argument, although at some level is perhaps valid, that women are not entering into the labor market, but at the same point of time it cannot fully explain that why men are missing in Indian manufacturing and why you cannot have those shift system. Then the third counter argument given by the skeptics is that in India, this lack of manufacturing is and lack of labor-intensive products because of the fact that you do not have that just-in-time delivery service. So people would want to, like, if they order their products right now, people would want to have their products to be delivered in 48 hours, something like Amazon. Now, the reason why Amazon is the greatest company that exists is because of the way that it sorts its products. They've invested huge in their logistics, and that is why it's a $1 trillion company. It's a $1 trillion company because it can perform its logistics very well. So that just in time, it tracks your orders. It says that we will deliver in 48 hours. In Prime, they say that we will deliver in 24 hours, and they're able to do that irrespective of the infrastructure. Now, what the argument says is that in India, because of the seasonality of demands, so the bulk buyers like Walmart, they are on very tight schedules, and we need good shipping. You need good airports, you need good railways, you need good roads. All of that, which promotes just-in-time delivery, is missing in India. Yes, of course, this argument to a certain extent is correct, but this cannot fully explain why states which have good infrastructure are not doing well. So states like Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, which have very good infrastructure, they have good ports, they have good private ports as well. Tamil Nadu also has private ports as well as public sector ports. They have good infrastructure at the ports as well. They should have good low skill manufacturing. Why should they not have low skill manufacturing? So this argument that we have poor infrastructure by itself cannot, it can explain certain aspect that why MP does not have good manufacturing, but the coastal states and states with good infrastructure, with good amount of money, why these states are not having labor intensive manufacturing is again not being explained by this. The fourth argument that we have is the counter argument that we have from the skeptics is that there is a lack of credit, that the small firms are not able to access credit. Yes, this is again one of the arguments that is correct, that the access to credit perhaps to smaller firms is a little less, which is now being improved. If you've heard of something like Mudra, and in fact under the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme, if you've heard that the government is now investing, the government has a loan facility of 3 lakh crore rupees, in which firms can overdraft on whatever facility that they had, and even if they do not repay that money, then the government of India will repay that to the banks. So kind of a credit guarantee reform, the credit guarantee fund that the government has created for 3 lakh crore rupees. So, but the problem is that again the banks are not willing to lend. So, although the government has created this facility, the banks have not been able to pass this facility to the manufacturers, and the manufacturer in this particular time is now wary that who will buy my products, where am I going to access my raw material and the other products. So that's why the manufacturing is kind of stalled, and this has not taken off. This 300 crore, the 3,000 3 lakh crore rupee fund is not as taken off well now. So coming back to this argument that the lack of access to credit, so yes, to a certain extent it is true, but if you compare, both medium and large scale firms are now are getting, which are into capital intensive sectors, get their finances, get their money from the banks for motor vehicles and motor parks, which I mean, so why, if they can get money from the market, why can't they, these firms can get money if they are available, if it is available. So this factor does not completely explain. The banks will not be discriminating, know that this firm is a labor intensive manufacturing, I should not lend to this particular firm. This firm is a capital intensive firm, we should lend to this particular firm. So although to certain extent in the earlier era this was perhaps valid, but not in the current era, where you have different kinds of schemes. You have the Mudra scheme, you have different other schemes available, credit default schemes available. So this argument does not stand true in the contemporary times. Then the fifth argument, which is given, is that whenever you have different surveys among business, in the business community, so these surveys, the CEOs, or the owners of the businesses, they do not point out to labor market rigidities as a key problem. So in this business environment surveys that you have, these problems are not being highlighted by the entrepreneurs or by the manufacturers. Now, this is a classical case of a selection problem in economics. Now, what has happened is that because the survey is most of these surveys happen in the mid-size and large firms. So if you go to HUL and say that, do you have a labor problem, they will obviously say that no, we don't have a labor problem, because there's a huge firm. They can easily handle their labor problems. So the design of the survey, as well as who are you going to for this survey, is what that matters. So in these surveys, overwhelmingly the survey is being taken from large and mid-sized firms, for which labor problem is not a huge problem. Remember, the economies of scale actually works in favor for hiring more people if you have more than 250 workers. So only when you are taking this survey from the small manufacturers, only then you will be able to realize that labor market problem is a major problem in the market. So mid-size firms are basically are capital intensive, and these large firms are capital intensive. And the service sector firms that you are going for the survey are not actually facing the wrath of the IDA, because that particular chapter of hiring 100 workers and then not being able to fire any one of them is not valid to the service sector firms. So for if your survey is based on these three kinds of people, then they're not going to complain about the labor market. For the labor market survey, you actually need to go down to the unorganized sector and then ask them about it. Now, coming to the sixth problem, the sixth counter argument which is made by the skeptics is that the labor market, the labor laws is not enforced. Although we have huge onerous labor laws, but essentially these labor laws are not followed. No one checks whether you are following the labor law or not. So effectively, they are not binding. But the problem is not about their binding. The problem is that of due diligence, that you need to have that paperwork. You always have that sword of the labor inspector hanging on your head, and then you have a huge burden of the judiciary. If a particular problem goes into the judiciary, then it will take a huge time. So that again, the overburdened judiciary kind of delays the overall cost, and increases the cost. And that is where this Uttam Nakate case is there. And just read this particular, if you have time, just read this particular case study, whereby you will find that even after 2 decades, a particular employee was again reinstated with complete wages. The counter argument which is given by the skeptics is that that the labor laws are basically associated to a very tiny section of the labor force, which basically says that since 90% of the workforce is in the informal market, only 10% of the workforce will actually have to face the labor laws. So, but this argument is a disingenuous argument. The reason is it that it is because of it is very reason because of these labor laws that you have only 10% of the formal sector. Had these labor laws been more relaxed, then this 90% would have been less. So the entire argument is inverted. That the authors are saying that the very reason that you have small firms, the very reason that you have a very small formal sector is because of these labor laws. So we need to change something about these labor laws. What must be done? Now, what must be done is we cannot actually abolish all labor laws. We need to balance between the rights of the workers, which need to be protected, as well as we need to see that the compliance cost is not huge for the manufacturers. So we need to balance both these aspects. So for example, ILO has certain covenants, has certain conditions over how labor laws should be there. There should be a tripartite agreement between the stakeholders, between the labor and between the manufacturers before passing any labor laws. But what has happened in the last couple of months is that the state government, without consulting the trade unions, without consulting the central government, without consulting the workers, they have unilaterally passed the labor laws, which is again not correct. So what they have done is that they've gone to the other extreme to protect the markets, to protect the manufacturers. That is again that is not the right approach. You need to balance them out. And if you want to favor in terms of the manufacturers, what you can do is then the government should come into place and say that okay, if you are unemployed, then I am willing to pay you an unemployment benefit. If you fall unhealthy, if you are sick, then I am willing to take up that cost. So the labor laws can be relaxed, but in favor of the manufacturers. But again, that depends on how much of social security is being provided by the state. In case the state is not providing social security, the state is not providing that insurance, and that is not even available in the workplace, what will happen is that they will have exploitation of labor. So that also we don't want. So what we have is the new labor codes. I talked about the 4 labor codes that is available. Please mention those in your answers. Then apart from that, we need to have a dispute redressal mechanism. Not every case should go to the courts and tribunals. We need to have a labor tribunal. In that labor tribunal should be the final authority, and within a particular time, say 90 days, you should be able to resolve this dispute. Something like IBC. In an IBC, if a particular organization is declared bankrupt, then you have 180 days and plus 90 more days to resolve that issue. Similarly, we need to have a timeline in which you need to have resolved this issue. Then the other issue is that the manufacturer or the entrepreneur should be able to reassign a worker. So if a particular institution hired me for a particular job, and if that job requirement changes, I should be given appropriate training and be able to change the nature of my job. That should be available. So that flexibility of hiring and then changing the domain of the work or the domain of my specialization should be available to the manufacturer. And if I'm not performing, the law should empower the manufacturer or the entrepreneur to fire me. Then the strikes without notice should again be banned, because again that brings a strong disrepute to the Indian economy, that there are a lot of strikes happening. So without notice, the strikes, the wildcat strikes that you have should not be allowed. And again, this law of chapter 5b, that you cannot lay off workers, should again be repealed. So there are a number of things that the government of India should do to enhance the enhance the image of the Indian market in the world, as well as focus towards the plight of the manufacturers, that the manufacturers have towards the labor laws. So this was about your reading of Bhagwati and Panagriya. Now, apart from this, what I want you to do is, in the second reading that I've sent you, there are certain labor changes that have been made by the government, which are mentioned here. So go through them, and this is an article of the existing labor laws. This is an Indian Express article, so which explains that what has happened. Go through this for current affairs. And apart from that, there is an EPW article that I've also mentioned, which kind of argues that the kind of labor law changes that has done by the government, these three state governments, will lead to anarchy in the labor market. And what it has done is what is probably called as throwing the baby along with the bathwater. So that is the kind of approach that that the government has taken. They have gone to the extreme other end in the favor of the manufacturers and against the concerns of the labor. So just scroll through them. I don't want you to read too much into it. Just definitely go through this particular article if you have time. It will take you only 5 minutes.